After receiving a large inheritance, I offered to buy my parents a new house. At a family dinner, my father said, "Don't think money makes you special. You just happen to be in the right place." I nodded, not arguing. The next day, I canceled the house deal and invested the money in a charity fund. When my parents asked about the house, I said, "I decided you don't need money from someone who just got lucky." My father started backtracking, but I cut in, "Strange how my unspecial money suddenly matters so much to you." Now they stay in their old apartment and the fund helps people who truly value support. So picture this. I'm sitting in this fancy lawyer's office in downtown Chicago, trying not to look completely shell-shocked while this dude in a Brooks Brothers suit is telling me my godfather left me his entire estate. No cap. We're talking 7 figures here. The kind of money that makes you wonder if you're being punked. My godfather Richard was this eccentric bachelor type who made a killing in tech investments back in the 90s. He never had kids of his own, but he'd always been there for me. Birthday cards with crisp $50 bills, showing up to my high school graduation, helping me pick out my first car, a beat-up Honda that I loved more than anything. But this was next level. I'd just turned 28, living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, driving a 2012 Chevy that made concerning noises when it rained, and working my butt off at a marketing firm where my boss took credit for half my ideas. And suddenly, boom, financial freedom landed in my lap like a gift from the universe. First thing I thought about? My parents. See, they'd been struggling forever. Dad worked at the same factory for 30 years. Mom picked up shifts at Target to make ends meet. Their apartment was this cramped 2-bedroom in a complex that had seen better days. The carpet was from the 90s, the appliances constantly broke down, and the neighborhood had gotten sketchier over the years. But they were too proud to move in with my brother or me, and their fixed income meant they were basically stuck. So I called up this realtor, Jen, super nice lady with a Starbucks addiction worse than mine, and we started looking at houses. Nothing crazy mansion-like, but something nice in a good neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, a decent yard, modern kitchen, the works. Found this perfect place about 20 minutes from where I lived. Big enough for them to be comfortable, close enough for Sunday dinners. The price tag? Let's just say it wouldn't even make a dent in what Richard left me. I was so pumped to tell them. Like imagining the look on Mom's face when I handed her the keys. I was ready to film that reaction for TikTok glory. We always did Sunday dinner together, a tradition Mom refused to give up even when times were tough. So I brought over a bottle of champagne, ready to spill the beans over her famous pot roast. "I've got some news," I said, trying to play it cool while practically vibrating with excitement. Dad looked suspicious immediately. He's got this way of narrowing his eyes that made me feel like I was 16 again, trying to explain why I missed curfew. "What kind of news?" Well, I took a deep breath. "You know Richard left me some money." Mom nodded. Such a generous man. God rest his soul. "Yeah, well, it was substantial. And I want to do something meaningful with it." I pulled up the photos of the house on my phone and slid it across the table. "I bought you guys a house." The silence that followed was not the shocked, joyful silence I was expecting. More like the uncomfortable silence after someone tells an inappropriate joke at Thanksgiving dinner. Mom picked up the phone, scrolling through the pictures with wide eyes. This is beautiful, honey." Dad didn't even look, just kept cutting his pot roast with more force than necessary. "It's in Cedar Heights, great neighborhood, good schools nearby for when the grandkids come visit," I rambled, trying to fill the silence. "Closing is next week. I thought maybe we could go furniture shopping after." That's when Dad put down his fork, hard. "Don't think money makes you special," he said, his voice doing that quiet, angry thing that was worse than yelling. "You just happened to be in the right place. Richard felt sorry for you because your mom and I couldn't give you fancy things." Mom put her hand on his arm. "Frank? No, she needs to hear this," Dad continued. "Some of us worked our whole lives and have nothing to show for it. Others just get lucky. Nothing special about getting a handout." I felt like someone had dumped ice water down my back. "Dad, it's not like that. I just wanted to help." "We don't need your help," he cut me off. "We've managed just fine for decades without handouts." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. The rest of dinner was torture. Mom trying to make small talk, Dad barely acknowledging me fighting back tears while picking at my food. I left early, saying I had work to do, the champagne still unopened. That night, I stared at my ceiling, replaying Dad's words over and over. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called the realtor and canceled the closing. Then I made an appointment with a financial advisor and set up a charitable foundation focused on housing insecurity and education for low-income families in our city. I named it after Richard. Seemed fitting. For about a week, I didn't hear from my parents. Then Mom called, her voice all cheerful like nothing had happened. "So, when do we get to see this house?" "Dad's been looking at paint samples," she said, the lie so obvious it was almost funny. "Oh, about that," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I decided you don't need money from someone who just got lucky. I've put the money into a charity fund instead." The silence on the other end was deafening. "But we thought your father didn't mean—" "Strange how my unspecial money suddenly matters so much," I said, surprised at how calm I felt. "The Richard Wilson Foundation will help families in need with housing and education. I think he'd like that better than buying a house for people who think I'm just showing off." Dad got on the phone then, backpedaling so hard he could have won the Tour de France in reverse. "Now listen, I was just having a bad day. You know how proud I am of you. Gotta go, Dad. The foundation board is meeting this afternoon. Love you both." Update 1 y'all. The messages blowing up my inbox are wild. Thanks for the support. Mom's been calling daily, saying dad's processing things. Meanwhile, I met the first family receiving housing assistance through the foundation. Single mom with 3 kids living in her car after escaping an abusive relationship. Dad would call this a handout too, right? When did helping others become something to be ashamed of? What would you have done in my shoes? That first board meeting? Talk about baptism by fire. There I was in this conference room at the Willis Tower, surrounded by actual professionals, a retired judge, 2 social workers, a community organizer, and this badass woman who'd built affordable housing projects across the Midwest. And then there was me, still wearing the same H&M blazer I'd had since college, pretending I belonged there. The foundation director, Amara, this brilliant Harvard grad who could have made bank at any corporate job but chose nonprofit work, walked us through the mission statement I'd helped draft. We identify families in crisis situations and provide immediate housing solutions along with educational support and financial literacy training, she explained, making my jumbled ideas sound coherent and professional. Our goal isn't just to put roofs over heads, but to create pathways to stable futures. When everyone turned to me, the visionary founder, for some profound statement, I just blurted out the truth. I got lucky, I said, echoing my dad's words but reclaiming them. Someone believed in me enough to leave me this money, and I want to pay that forward. Not everyone has a Richard in their life, but maybe this foundation can be that for some people. To my surprise, that seemed to resonate. By the end of that meeting, we'd approved emergency housing for 3 families and set up a scholarship program for kids from the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Meanwhile, life at my parents' place carried on. Their apartment problems multiplied. The AC unit died during the hottest July on record. The building management kept promising repairs that never happened, and their upstairs neighbor apparently decided to take up river dancing as a midnight hobby. Mom started dropping hints during our weekly calls. The Johnsons down the hall are moving to Florida. Their daughter bought them a condo there. Such a blessing at their age. I'd just make sympathetic noises and change the subject. Dad was a tougher nut to crack. Pride is like his religion, and he was in full Sunday worship mode. We'd do these awkward dinners where he'd brag about fixing something in their apartment, himself saving a fortune on repairmen, while ignoring the fact that the fix was temporary at best. Did I tell you I patched the ceiling leak? He'd say, pointing to a clearly water-damaged spot that would definitely collapse during the next rainstorm. These young maintenance guys don't know what they're doing. Nothing beats experience. Mom would give me these pleading looks behind his back, but I pretended not to notice. I wasn't being petty. Okay, maybe a little petty, but mostly I was honoring Dad's stated wishes. He didn't want my lucky money, and I was respecting that choice. My brother Tony thought I was being harsh. You could have just waited a few days for Dad to cool off, he said over beers at this dive bar we'd been going to since college. You know how he gets. Yeah, I do know, I replied, picking at the label on my Bud Light. That's the problem. He gets to say whatever hurtful thing pops into his head, and we're all supposed to pretend it didn't happen. Tony couldn't argue with that. He'd been on the receiving end of Dad's tough love plenty of times himself. Besides, I added, the foundation is doing real good. You should see these families, Tony. People who've been knocked down by life so many times but keep getting back up. They're not looking for handouts. They're looking for someone to believe in them. The foundation's first big win came about 2 months in. This family, mom, dad, 3 kids under 10, had been living in their minivan after the father lost his construction job and they got evicted. We got them into temporary housing, helped the dad find work with one of our partner companies, and enrolled the kids in school with all the supplies they needed. When they moved into their new apartment, nothing fancy, just clean and safe, the mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. You don't know what this means, she kept saying, to have someone believe in us when everyone else gave up. I thought about my own dad, about the crushing weight of his pride, and wondered if he'd ever allow himself to feel the kind of gratitude this woman expressed so freely. That night, I drove past my parents' apartment building on the way home. The place looked even more run down than I remembered, with peeling paint and security doors that didn't quite close right. For a moment, I almost caved. I could still buy them a house, swallow my hurt feelings, pretend Dad's words hadn't cut to the bone. But then I remembered something Richard had told me once. Respect isn't just something you give, he'd said. It's also something you demand for yourself. So I drove home to my own place, still the same modest apartment, though I'd finally replaced that lumpy IKEA couch with something that didn't torture my back. I could have bought myself a mansion too, but that seemed pointless. The money felt more like a responsibility than a windfall. The real turning point came when the local news did a feature on the foundation. There I was, awkwardly explaining our mission while the reporter nodded earnestly. They interviewed a couple of the families we'd helped, showed the after-school program we'd funded in the neighborhood with the worst-performing schools. I didn't tell my parents about the segment, but apparently their neighbor Mrs. Kaczynski did. She'd been bringing Mom casseroles since I was in diapers and felt entitled to comment on all family matters. Your daughter's quite the philanthropist, she told Mom at the mailboxes. Saw her on Channel 7. Something about a housing foundation? Strange she'd help strangers find homes when her own parents live in this dump. Mom called me in tears that night. Is this about punishing your father? She asked, her voice small and hurt. Because if it is, you're punishing me too. That hit me like a truck. No, Mom, it's not about punishment. It's about respect. Dad made it clear he didn't want my money because it wasn't earned. I'm respecting his wishes. He didn't mean it, she insisted. You know how he is. That's the problem, Mom. I do know how he is. And maybe it's time he faced consequences for the hurtful things he says. The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. The water heater broke again, she finally said. We've been taking cold showers for 3 days. My heart squeezed. Mom, I'm not asking for a house, she continued quickly. Just, maybe you could talk to him? Meet halfway? I promised to think about it, which wasn't a lie. I did think about it. A lot. Update 2, folks. Your comments about enabling Dad's behavior versus helping Mom hit home hard. I've been up all night wrestling with this. Yesterday went to inspect their apartment myself, found black mold, faulty wiring, and Mom's secretly taking extra shifts at Target to pay for repairs Dad won't admit they need. She looked exhausted. He looked defeated, but still stubborn. How do you help someone who sees accepting help as failure? Is there a middle ground between enabling pride and watching your parents suffer? The apartment was worse than I thought. Like, way worse. I showed up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, knowing Dad would be at his weekly veterans meetup at the American Legion. Mom looked surprised to see me standing at her door with coffee and donuts from Dunkin'. Just in the neighborhood, I lied, and she let me in with a knowing look. The place hit me with a wave of childhood nostalgia. Same faded family photos on the walls, same worn-out recliner where Dad watched Eagles games, same smell of Mom's lavender air freshener fighting a losing battle against the building's general mustiness. But seeing it with adult eyes was different. The water stain on the ceiling had spread like an ugly ink blot. The linoleum in the kitchen was curling up at the edges. And was that mold creeping up the bathroom wall? Mom, this is serious, I said, inspecting the black spots. This is toxic. You guys can't live like this, she sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 63 years. I've called maintenance 5 times. They spray something, it comes back. The whole building has issues. I opened more cabinets, checked under sinks, looked at electrical outlets. The place was basically falling apart around them. And that's when I noticed Mom's Target schedule pinned to the fridge. She'd picked up 3 extra shifts that week. I thought you were cutting back hours, I asked, pointing to the schedule. You said your knees couldn't handle standing that long anymore? Mom busied herself wiping down the already clean counter. Bills don't pay themselves, and your father's prescription costs went up again. But his insurance doesn't cover the new medication his doctor wants him on. She looked up, finally meeting my eyes. He doesn't know I picked up extra shifts. He thinks we're managing fine on retirement and his pension. The weight of their situation hit me all at once. Dad's pride wasn't just hurting him, it was hurting Mom too. She was literally working herself to exhaustion to maintain the illusion that they were doing okay. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. After what happened with the house? She shrugged. I didn't want to come between you two again. I pulled out a chair and sat down at the small kitchen table where I'd done homework, celebrated birthdays, and learned life lessons for 18 years. This isn't sustainable, Mom. You're killing yourself trying to keep up appearances. And for what? So Dad can pretend everything's fine? She joined me at the table, her hands, more wrinkled and spotted than I remembered, wrapping around her coffee mug for warmth. You don't understand what it's like for him, she said softly. He was always the provider, the strong one. Losing. It's like losing his identity. But it's okay for you to work until you collapse? How is that fair? She gave me a sad smile. Marriage isn't about fair, honey. It's about carrying each other through the hard times. Yeah, well, it looks like you're doing all the carrying right now. I left their apartment with a heavy heart and a racing mind. The foundation was doing amazing work. We'd helped 14 families find stable housing and had partnerships with 3 schools for after-school programs. But charity begins at home, right? What good was I doing if I couldn't even help my own parents? Tony met me for lunch at this hipster sandwich place near my office. He'd always been the diplomatic one in the family, less likely to butt heads with Dad, more patient with Mom's enabling behavior. You should see their place, I told him, picking at my overly fancy avocado BLT. It's a health hazard for real, and Mom's working herself to death while Dad pretends everything's hunky-dory. Tony nodded, looking troubled. I tried to give them some money last month. Dad practically threw it back in my face, said he wasn't a charity case. See? That's exactly the problem. I threw up my hands, earning annoyed glances from the MacBook crowd around us. His pride is more important than their actual well-being. My brother took a long sip of his kombucha before answering. What if we don't give them money directly? What if we find another way? That conversation sparked an idea. A slightly devious, possibly manipulative, but potentially perfect idea. The next day, I called an emergency board meeting at the foundation, laid out my thoughts, prepared for pushback. Instead, Amara nodded thoughtfully. It aligns with our mission, she said, and it could become a model for a new program. So we created this Senior Housing Dignity Initiative, a program specifically targeting elderly individuals in unsafe living conditions who might be reluctant to accept direct assistance. The first test case? A couple in their 60s living in a deteriorating apartment complex on the north side. We approached the building's management company with an offer they couldn't refuse, significant funding for building-wide improvements, with special focus on units housing seniors and families with children. In exchange, they had to freeze rent increases for existing tenants for 3 years. The company jumped at the deal. They got free renovations that would let them charge more for vacant units, and good PR to boot. I didn't tell my parents about any of this. As far as they knew, their landlord had suddenly decided to invest in major building improvements. Their unit would be fully renovated, new appliances, bathroom fixtures, flooring, windows, everything. And they'd be put up in a hotel during the work. Dad was suspicious, of course. Nothing's free in this world, he grumbled when Mom told me about the landlord's announcement on our weekly call. They'll jack up the rent the minute the paint dries. Actually, I said, trying to sound casual, I heard they had to agree to freeze rents for current tenants. Something about a community development grant. The renovation started 2 weeks later. Mom sent daily updates with excited texts and photos of the progress. Dad remained skeptical but couldn't deny the improvements were substantial. Meanwhile, I had another card to play. Through the foundation, we'd started a program connecting retired veterans with paid mentoring positions at local schools and community centers. The vets got supplemental income and purpose. The kids got role models and support. I made sure the program recruiter, an old army buddy of Dad's, reached out personally. Frank, we need guys like you, he told Dad over beers. These kids don't have men in their lives showing them how to be responsible adults. 2 afternoons a week, decent stipend, plus you'd be doing a service for the community. To everyone's shock, Dad said yes. Maybe he was tired of sitting around the apartment all day. Maybe he missed feeling useful. Whatever the reason, he started working with middle school boys in an after-school program, teaching them practical skills like basic home repairs and woodworking. The first time I saw him in action was a revelation. Gone was the bitter, defensive man who'd lashed out at Sunday dinner. In his place was the Dad I remembered from childhood, patient, knowledgeable, quietly proud of his abilities. The boys clearly adored him, hanging on his every word as he demonstrated how to change a tire or fix a leaky faucet. You're a natural, I told him afterward, careful to frame it as a casual visit to the center, rather than checking up on him. Specifically, he looked embarrassed but pleased. These kids today don't know how to do anything with their hands. All screens, no skills. Someone's got to teach them. I nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. Lucky to have you then. Update. 3. I'm reading your comments with tears in my eyes. Today changed everything. Dad found out about the foundation's involvement in their building renovation when a local newspaper ran a feature. He showed up at my office unannounced. I legit thought he was going to blow up. Instead, he broke down crying. I was wrong, he said. Pride made me blind. We're taking baby steps toward healing. Has anyone else experienced this kind of breakthrough with stubborn parents? Is forgiveness always the right choice? The article was supposed to be about the foundation's 1-year anniversary. A feel-good piece highlighting our accomplishments. 57 families housed, 3 building renovations completed, 200 kids in educational programs. Standard nonprofit PR stuff. But the young reporter got curious about our senior Housing Dignity Initiative and dug deeper. Found the connection between our first test case building and my last name. Put 2 and 2 together and made it the emotional hook for his story. Foundation founder secretly renovates parents' building. After father refuses direct help, the headline read. There was even a quote from Mrs. Kaczynski, who apparently had no qualms about talking to the press. Her father was too proud to accept charity, even from his own daughter, so she found a way to help without hurting his pride. Now that's love. Was in a meeting when my assistant poked her head in. Your father's here, she said, looking concerned. He seems upset. My stomach dropped to my shoes. The conference room had glass walls, and I could see Dad in the waiting area, pacing with a newspaper clutched in his hand. He looked like a thundercloud about to burst. I need 5 minutes, I told the board members, who were eyeing the situation with obvious curiosity. Dad didn't wait for me to speak when I approached, just thrust the newspaper at me, his hand shaking slightly. Is this true? He demanded, his voice gruff. I skimmed the article, though I already knew what it would say. Yes, I admitted. But Dad, I was just trying to— Not here, he cut me off. Can we go somewhere private? I led him to my office, this knot of dread growing in my stomach. Was he going to tell me I'd humiliated him publicly? That I had no right to interfere in their lives? That he was moving out of the apartment rather than accept my charity? Once the door closed behind us, he just stood there, looking around at my office like he was seeing it for the first time. The photos on my desk, the degrees on the wall, the view of the city skyline. This is nice, he finally said, his voice strangely subdued. You've done well for yourself, even before Richard's money. Thanks, Dad, I said cautiously, waiting for the other shoe to drop. He sank into the chair across from my desk, suddenly looking older and smaller than I remembered. The newspaper was crumpled in his hands. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. About the building, about the veterans program. I sat on the edge of my desk trying to find the right words. Would you have accepted if you knew it came from me, from the foundation? He was quiet for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. No, probably not. That's why. You've been helping us all this time, and I've been too blind to see it. His voice caught, and to my absolute shock, I saw tears in his eyes. I was wrong, you know, what I said that night, about the money not making you special. I felt my own eyes filling up. Dad. No, let me finish. He straightened up, meeting my gaze directly. The truth is, you were always special. Richard saw it. That's why he left you the money. Not out of pity, but because he knew you'd do something meaningful with it. He gestured at the newspaper. And look what you've done. Not just for us, but for all these people. I couldn't speak, past the lump in my throat. Pride, he continued, shaking his head. It's a stupid thing. Makes you blind. Makes you hurt the people you love most. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Your mother kept telling me to apologize, but I was too stubborn. And now everyone in the neighborhood knows what a fool I've been. That wasn't my intention, I said quickly. I never wanted to embarrass you. I know that. He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You get that from your mother, the kindness, always finding ways to help without making people feel small. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken words and feelings. I'm sorry, he finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. For what I said, for being too proud to see what was right in front of me, for making your mother suffer because of my stubbornness. I moved around the desk and hugged him, feeling his shoulders shake slightly under my arms, my tough, proud dad finally letting down his walls. Those boys at the center, he said when we pulled apart, both wiping our eyes. They look at me like I've got all the answers, like I'm worth something. You are, I told him firmly. To them, to Mom, to me and Tony. He nodded, visibly collecting himself. So, this foundation of yours, think they could use another volunteer? An old guy who knows his way around a toolbox? And just like that, a door that had been closed between us for over a year cracked open. We're taking baby steps. Dad's officially joined the foundation as a skills instructor, teaching both kids and adults basic home maintenance. Mom's helped organize a community garden at one of our housing developments. They're still in their apartment, now beautifully renovated, but Dad's talking about maybe moving to a smaller place closer to where most of the foundation's work happens. Less space to clean, he told Mom, though we all know the real reason is he wants to be more involved. The money that would have gone to their house is doing far more good spread across multiple projects. And honestly, the relationship we're rebuilding is worth more than any house I could have bought them. Last Sunday dinner, Dad actually raised a toast. To my daughter, he said, looking at me with clear pride, who taught her old man the difference between charity and love. Later, as we were doing dishes, he bumped my shoulder gently. That house you were going to buy us, he said casually. Was it really nice? I smiled, playing along. Pretty nice. 3 bedrooms, big backyard, good neighborhood. He nodded thoughtfully. Well, maybe someday we'll let you help us find something. Not because we need it, mind you, but because it would make you happy to do it. Baby steps, but in the right direction. And Richard? I think he'd be proud of how his gift turned out. Not just the foundation or the families we've helped, but the way it forced us all to confront some hard truths and come out stronger on the other side. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't money at all, but the lessons we learn about what truly matters.